Hello, and welcome to the 15th episode of The Alignment. That's a whole lot of episodes. We've covered a whole lot of subjects. It's been a long time coming, this episode. Today, we are talking all about friction, how you can reduce friction in your global product. The duty of software, in my opinion, is a holy war against friction in our lives, in our efforts to complete tasks. And therefore, this is the most essential of all of the topics we've covered so far. And we've got an incredible panel to help us do it. If you have not heard of us, we are Global App Testing. This should be the GAT logo, but it's the alignment logo. If you don't know what we do, the clue is in the name. We work with some of the biggest software businesses in the world, including Microsoft, Google, and many others, to help them to understand their global experiences, including both functional bugs and UX testing. If you are new to the alignment, which I hope is some people here, I'm going to quickly rehash the format for you. We're going to spend the first 30 minutes setting out the title. So the title being the 5 ways you can reduce global friction, where each of our speakers here today has one fantastic way that you can reduce global friction in your product. While they are doing that, please do pile in to the Q&A box. You can see it at the bottom. It is now a little square speech icon with a question mark in the middle. Jump in with your questions, because we're going to spend the second 30 minutes talking all about those questions and doing a bit of a Q&A and developing the conversation a bit around some of the ways that we have set out. Today is an all-stars edition. That means that we have gone back to the very best speakers from the last 15 episodes, and we have added the fantastic Marcs Wilkinson to those people. So it's going to be a fantastic episode here today. We have, first of all, Alba Simon. Alba is the product lead at ASICS, meaning she's hard at work in driving extremely seamless experiences, buying new shoes online. She's going to be talking to us today about site speed, and it's important in reducing your global friction. Olga Safonova is the senior product manager at Workday, meaning that she is busy making your employee experience totally frictionless. Olga will be talking about shifting left in your localization and product development process as a lever for reducing friction. We have Alba Freire, who joins us from Uber today, which is obviously a case study for excellent user experience around the world and a very inspiring business in that regard. Caronlina is going to be talking about how you can use cultural frameworks in order to drive down global friction in your product. Our very own Artem Bobrovskiy will be talking about broadening your testing as a means of reducing your local friction in your product, and how you can use testing to ensure that there is as little friction as possible. And then finally, it is a pleasure to welcome Marcs, who is not an all-star, but will be a really excellent speaker. Freire have partnered with us on several of these before. He's going to be talking about adapting your discovery and delivery process in order to reduce global friction. So lots of fantastic content, some really exciting speeches coming up. And so without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to the very first of our speeches. You can see from the slide that's just popped up, I've forgotten to plug our podcast. Don't listen now, listen later, but we do have a fantastic podcast. The most recent guest on our podcast was Daniel Laraya, who, if you're not familiar with him, is the Chief Product Officer at Monday.com. So a really big, substantial business. And he's talking about what a product team should look like at different stages of your startup growth. He joined Monday.com when they just raised Series A, so just at the very start, and then the kind of product team transformed from a 2-person affair led by the founder into an enormous product team that Monday.com currently enjoys. So do listen to that. But first, we're going to listen to Alba. Alba is talking about improved site speed. And without much further ado, I'll pass over to you, Alba.
Hello, everyone. So before we kick in, I'm pretty sure if you have any sort of interaction with the internet, which, nowadays is everyone, right? We've all experienced it, just waiting a little too long for that page to load. And suddenly, life happens, you're distracted, you're on the bus, you need to catch it, you need to run for the train, your dog barks, your husband calls you, you get a new notification, and you abandon that site. Or even worse, you're just so purely frustrated of waiting there that you actively close the site. So I want you to, if there's one thing that you're going to take away from the next minutes that I'm going to talk is this. For every second that your site loads faster, the conversion rate improves on average by 17%. And the same goes for customer satisfaction. Now, obviously, that is not, a linear relationship. We know that the first 3 to 5 seconds are the most crucial, and after that, it's marginal. But still, 17% improvement on conversion rate on average for every second that your site loads faster. And when we think about friction, site speed is often an invisible factor that, impacts our user experience worldwide, really, because no matter how well designed your site is, you can have all the bells and whistles. If it's slow, users are going to get frustrated globally. Here in Japan, wherever it is, site speed matters. If we pop to the next slide, I will quickly just, before we move into how to improve it, just to continue, there's a variety of reasons of why your site might be slower than desired. And like everything in life, some are beyond your control. You might not be able to impact the internet infrastructure of your consumer or the bandwidth availability or, how congested the local network is, particularly in regions with this inconsistent mobile network coverage. And nowadays we know that the mobile user is ever more important because it's ever increasing. And different regions will have various levels of internet quality. And site performance can deteriorate when accessed in these areas with slow internet speed or high latency. However, many causes of poor site speed are within your control, and that's where you can take proactive steps to tackle them. So poor optimization of images and videos, excessive third-party scripts or integrations, unnecessary data requests, the buildup of outdated or inefficient code, all stacks up and adds friction and detracts from the overall experience that you're giving to your consumers. So I'll briefly touch on 3 ways you can improve site speed. The first one is, that image and video optimization. There is nothing more frustrating than logging on to a website and having, an image that's not loading or a video that's buffering, and it just takes forever to actually watch that content. So remember, you can easily compress it. You can, especially for mobile devices, compress the content. Don't sacrifice on quality. Obviously, you don't want things that are pixelated. But there's really no reason why an image should weigh several megabytes. And remember that every kilobyte that you save is a win for site speed. The next one is lazy loading. So instead of, loading the entire page all at once, which can significantly delay the display of important content, implement lazy loading. And this really means just only loading the images, video, or any other component that's about to be visible in the viewport of the consumer. So by prioritizing, displaying this first, you can really make some wins on site speed. And the last one is my favorite. And this is something that, I advocate for with any team that I work with, all developers that I interact with. I always tell them to have the Boy Scout mentality. So leave the code base cleaner than you found it. Over time, websites can accumulate inefficient code, unnecessary plugins, scripts, excessive files, and all of that just adds up and contributes to a slower site. So if you regularly refactor and streamline the code, you can ensure that your site performance will be healthy over a longer term. So yeah, don't let that add up. Now, if we move to the next slide, really, to recap all of this, I haven't really, shared anything that's a secret. Like all these strategies for optimizing site speed are very well known in the industry. But if you're a consumer, you're experiencing a slow website, you might be asking yourself, why has nobody, prioritized this? Why is nobody taking any action? And if you're a product manager or anyone on a product team or you're internal and working on a website or an app that's slow, you might be asking, okay, why is there no action being taken? And in my experience, site speed is not always prioritized, mainly for 2 reasons. One is complexity. So optimizing site speed is not straightforward. It's not something that's, a single ticket that you can put into a sprint and be done with. It is a continuous process that requires, often multiple teams, and it needs to be integrated into your workflow. It's not a one-off exercise. It's also hard to measure that improvement in some cases because it's incremental. It's several pieces of work that eventually add up, but it will be very hard to measure, the smaller pieces of it. And the second reason is really juggling those priorities. So often there's a lot of pressure from, management, clients, stakeholders to roll out the new feature and product as quickly as possible, because everyone wants, the latest shiny feature. You might see a competitor that's doing it, so you don't want to fall behind. And don't get me wrong, new products and new features are always important, but we need to find a way to balance out performance issues such as site speed, because your product can have all the bells and whistles, but if it's slow, again, it will not work. So to wrap it up, site speed is not a nice to have. It is an absolute must. In today's world, especially with the younger generations who are glued to TikTok and who have same-day delivery, users expect immediacy. And if we do not deliver on that, we are going to disappoint. So faster websites don't just prevent frustration, but they also foster loyalty, they drive engagement, they secure more sales, and in the longer term, they drive consumer satisfaction, which is what we're all looking for. So I'd love to hear from you if you're tackling this within your product, and if so, how?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alba. And do let us know if you are focused on site speed. Just pile into the comments and tell us about it. I will ask some of the other panelists, I think, whether it is a focus for them. Our next speaker is Olga. Olga is the Senior Product Manager at Workday, and she'll be talking about shifting left in localization as a lever for reducing local friction. Over to you, Olga.
Thank you, Adam. So hi, everyone. Olga is here. And today we're tackling this crucial topic of how to avoid those frustrating UX bumps on the road when designing for global audience. After all, a happy user is more likely to stick around. A happy user is a loyal user. You just heard from Alba. That is crucial and important for all of us. And imagine if you're trying to navigate an app where the buttons are misaligned or the text is gibberish. That's not great experience, right? And this is exactly that kind of frustrations we are here to prevent. So first things first, I want to talk today about something called shift left in product localization. And when we say shift left, what we mean is pretty much bringing localization experts early in the design process rather than kind of treating it as an afterthought. So that comes pretty much even when you are trying to understand what problems you're trying to solve for your users, when you talk to users, when you're conducting the interviews with your users. Because in this case, local experts can interpret the insights if you're getting from a global audience and kind of make sure that you do not misunderstand anything. And basically, if you do it this way, if you kind of involve experts early, it means you will save time, money, unnecessary efforts down the road, and frustrations, of course. Also think if you design a form field and those fields, for example, they need to accommodate for longer names, as we know, might come from a certain markets or certain locations, or even addresses and if you plan that up front, actually, you will not have to redesign it or fix it afterwards. And again, when I say localization experts, that's not just translators. It's not just someone who knows the language that you want to localize for. It's actually someone who also understands some cultural nuances of your target market or a target audience. And again, just very simple things like color, meaning of color, right? We know, like in the Western cultures, green, I'm wearing green today, it's something positive, it is associated with growth, but in some other cultures, it might symbolize something that you do not want to be associated with. Or, for example, they might find an image that could be like culturally insensitive for some regions. And again, better deal with it early on than kind of trying to fix it afterwards. Next, also when you are designing, when you are in the process of creating the user experience, maybe you could get some tooling to help you up. So, for instance, we're using Phrase plugin for Figma, And with this, you can actually localize your strings in your user interface into many different languages and basically figure out, well, does it work for all the combination, all of the languages that you are designing for? Sometimes also some languages may be, if they read from, let's say, right to left rather than left to right, how does it look and how does it work? So make sure that your layout adapts accordingly and gracefully, no matter what language you are designing for. And finally, I think when we think of global audience, that is actually beyond language. It's not necessarily only different languages, but it's also different and diverse lived experiences, varying ability levels, and also varying access to technology. And again, like Alba mentioned, that there are some things that you cannot control, but there are things that you should be aware of at least. Also, you should think of your language choices, like your like how you formulate the message that you present to the users on your app or your website. Again, avoid using jargon. Avoid using something that is not translates well into other languages. Don't be too technical unless you are actually technical by design. And again, if you read something in English and it's a complex and dense material, but English is not necessarily your native language, it probably will be difficult for you to understand. So think about those users as well. And also, well, as we get older, we start, most of us start experiencing maybe some issues with our vision and we don't see as well as we used to. I know that from personal experience. Again, think of how you can design for that experience as well. Apply accessibility principles, make sure that you're using high contrast and always think accessibility, and also users who actually might be using assistive technology, and read the content of your website or your app with assistive technology, such as screen readers, right? Yeah, to wrap it up, again, let's prioritize user-centric and inclusive design. And when you shift left, when you involve experts and be mindful of all users, you can create that truly engaging, useful user experience. Again, remember, happy user is a loyal user. So let's make sure every user, no matter where they are or how they access our products, has a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. Yeah, and I think that with localization, inclusiveness is like is something that really can be done in product design in key ways from the start of the process. So super interesting to hear you talk about it. Caroline, over to you. How can we use cultural frameworks as a lever to reduce friction?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Olga made a great presentation about shifting left in localization, and I want to explore more the cultural aspects in localization. So in today's world, users, customers, they expect more than just having a website or product translated into their language. They expect the product to speak to their culture. So, and if you can move on with the slides. Yeah, so let's talk about designing experience that transcend borders. Yeah, if you can go to the next slide and the next one. So how does culture influence UI and UX design? And there are several factors, but today I want to focus on three main ones: color, iconography, behavior, and communication style. So Olga did mention about color, and this is an important factor. Designers tend to assume that color means the same thing across culture. If you can go to the next slide, please. And that's not true. So colors have different meanings across cultures. One example that I like the most is the color white. So while in many cultures, white is associated with peace and is also the color of the bride, in China, white is associated with death, and it's actually the color people wear at funerals. So being aware of what color means in each culture and leveraging that to your communications, your marketing, your website and product can really help you design the best user experience. And similar to color, we are going to the next point. Similar to color, people tend to assume that the meaning of icon symbols and even emoji is universal. And again, that's not true. Different cultures have different meaning for icons and symbols. And even the big companies make mistakes on that. One example is Amazon. When they launched their website in India, users from rural India, they had no idea of what the magnifying glass icon meant. They did not associate that symbol with magnifying glass, and they did not associate that symbol with search at all. They actually thought it was a ping pong paddle. So imagine the confusion, the frustration. The user didn't know how to use the website. And this is becoming even more important as more and more people from rural areas have access to digital products and digital content. So understanding what symbols and icons mean in different culture and adapting that to your product can help you offer the best user experience. And then the last point is behavior and communication style. And there are a lot that can be said here, but I want to share two case studies, one successful and another not so successful. So if you can go to the next slide, this is the successful case study. So we have a Mozilla web page. On the left side of the screen, we have a screenshot for Mozilla landing page in the US. The US is considered a low context culture, meaning users don't need a lot of context to take action. So the design can be minimal, clean, just tell the user straightforward the action you need them to take, and they are gonna take it. So here we have the CTA button, free download. That's all you need to say for the user to take action. Now contrast that with the same landing page for China, which is a high context culture. And in high context culture, users expect and they need more context in order to take an action. And that context comes not only through the written content, but usually through images and icons. So here we have the same web page, two very different user experience tailored to the culture, very successful example. The next case study is not so successful. So back in 1999, eBay was already America's leading e-commerce, and they were expanding to new markets. And they decided to replicate the US model to Japan. They were so successful in the US, right? So why not just take the same model and replicate to Japan? What could go wrong, right? So they bought a local domain, translate the site into Japanese, and launched. 3 years later, they were forced to pull out. And eBay failed to understand the cultural difference between America and Japan. Risk-averse Japanese customers, they were being asked to submit their credit card information right at sign-up, which resulted in a high rate of abandonment. And here we are talking about like the early 2000s, the beginning of e-commerce. So of course, things have changed since then, but comparing to Americans, Japanese are more risk averse. So understanding the user behavior, communication style, and culture is key in helping you design global and successful user experience. And I want to close with some quick best practice, if you can go to the next slide. Some quick best practice for designing global inclusive UI and UX. First of all, include cultural insights into your UX research. And then create design systems that can adapt to different cultural contexts, allowing for variations in color scheme, iconography, and layout. And finally, don't assume universal behavior. Understand how users interact with information and their communication style. So hopefully those three best practices can help you design better UX and reduce friction for global users. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That's super interesting. And it made me think of, there's a great Vox video I'd encourage everybody to watch about the history of color in a sort of anthropological sense. And it was arguing that while colors have different cultural meanings, cultures tend to name colors in the same order. If you go for like, to proper remote cultures, and they had neural nets name colors, and the neural nets seem to name them in the same order that human cultures do, suggesting there was something innate to the colors about the properties of the color, about the order in which they were named. Anyway, that's a little bit of a sidetrack, but thank you so much for that. Artem, over to you. How do we broaden our testing as a lever for reducing global friction?
Thank you very much, Adam. Hello, everyone. It's great to be back. So Adam asked me to come up with one way how we can reduce instances of annoying UX issues. And as you know, we are a testing provider, and we're very lucky to work with some of the world's biggest software companies and a lot of the applications that you're likely to have on your phone too. And they obviously have specific interest in going global. So annoying UX issues is what we do. And I'd like to focus on one of them today. It's a problem that we observe more and more of our customers paying special attention to, especially when they go worldwide. And this is the problem of integrated UX. You see, these days, most successful software companies offer experiences that span beyond their software's user interface and include things like third-party integrations and offline experiences. We actually have an example here in this room with us today. Uber obviously relies not only on things like payment processing and mapping services, which are country specific, but also on the offline experience of the ride itself for a perfect end-to-end UX. So all those components, only one of which is your software's user interface, work together to create a complete experience. And if your app's UI is perfect, but the other parts are not working well together, then your customers will be unhappy, you'll introduce friction, and they will be looking for an alternative. So testing end-to-end integrated user experiences is your responsibility if you want to ensure customer delight and global growth. So how do you test it? So you need to think about three things. And yes, thank you for changing the slide. Basically, what you need to do is more of what's on the right, in addition to what you're doing there on the left. So moving on to three things you need to think about when testing your UX. First, you need to understand the customer's end-to-end entire journey. Quite often it begins much earlier than the first interaction with your user interface, like for example, responding to a promotional campaign, app installation, or some sort of account activation. And then you follow the experience all the way through to the end when the customer is done using your product and are enjoying the benefits of it. And I tend to use a technique called user story mapping for this. There's plenty of other great techniques to do this. And when you do this, be on the lookout specifically for three potential high-risk areas. These are elements that are owned by a third party. These are or a dependency on the customer's physical environment, like signal strength or lighting conditions or noise levels. And finally, the offline experiences like delivery or a ride. Once you've mapped the experience, this is the second tip, think about how you can make testing in production easier. Did I just say testing in production? Yes, it's very important to test in production because that's the only way how you can match the actual experience of your customers. And you can make it easier for yourself. And here's an example how you can do it. Say, for example, you have an e-commerce website that sells expensive items. You can introduce a special discount code, which when you apply it, the price of your product goes down to something like $1. And of course, with that price, you can make a lot of test purchases without breaking the bank. These should be real purchases with real payment processing and all the parts associated with it. And of course, such purchases should not go to fulfillment and should be instead canceled and refunded and should not be reflected in your BI reporting as well. And if you implement this, this makes it easy for you to make continuous frequent transactions from various different locations to make sure all your payment systems are working correctly. So finally, the third tip is to perform the testing in production and do it yourself. So can you automate this testing? Absolutely not. You need to experience the flow yourself firsthand. Of course, sometimes it's not quite possible to do it yourself when it requires access to a local environment, a specific country, or specific type of situation. But you need to do as much of it as possible yourself to get that experience. And for the other situations, you can scale your testing by working with a partner like Global App Testing that has access to local people around the globe with various different payment methods and in various different conditions. And that can present to you the result of their testing in the form of actionable insight. So to recap, the 3 things to do are map the experience end-to-end, look out for dependency on physical environment, integrated third parties, and offline experiences, make testing in production easier by developing special tools inside your product, and perform end-to-end UX testing manually yourself and scale it with a partner like Global App Testing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Artem. There's so much material in these speeches. We've got to condense it afterwards and send it out. I'm going to hand over to our final speaker now. Marcs is going to be talking all about adapting discovery processes to minimize global friction. I'm going to... Can everybody only see Marcs's screen? I've not clicked stop sharing, but I think I have. So without further ado, over to you, Marcs.
Thanks so much. So friction, you've probably experienced it. It's when you open that really promising search result and scroll down there, and that feeling starts to set in like something isn't quite right. Maybe it's like that heading that you don't quite get, or the currency symbol that makes you think, oh, this isn't for me. I won't pay shipping. But they've lost you. For product people, it's tough to get this right. And so let's not make it harder than it has to be, right? In my work at Phrase, we're pretty privileged to learn from teams who are really pushing the envelope in terms of like reaching a global audience. And so I want to share some practical tips that I've picked up for product teams dealing with these frictions in product development that make it really tough to ship great local experiences. So product discovery, if you do it, you know, and product discovery is not a one-size-fits-all thing, and surfacing global insights is really key to building impactful products that work where your business needs them to. Sometimes you don't need to look that far, actually, to open up new doors in discovery. And your customer-facing teams at your business are able to help. They're a secret weapon. They're dealing with different markets every day, and they're tapping into those insights. And that's going to really help you understand the cultural nuances and spot pain points, and even connect directly with those end users. And the team's going to benefit hugely from getting into this process and being involved in internal testing, helping with those feedback loops, and extending your discovery process beyond the obvious. You also got to be a little bit flexible. Global discovery isn't really a 9-to-5 operation. So supporting flexible hours with your teams across different time zones helps to make sure you don't miss valuable inputs. Flexibility drives inclusion anyways and leads to smarter and better product outcomes. And also get creative with your methods. Standard product research doesn't necessarily cut it globally, especially when you're facing language barriers, but technology gives us a really great creative set of options to overcome it. So you can localize your surveys, and you can use like in-product feedback loops, and even like live chats can be translated real time to gather real-time insights. With the right training, customer-facing teams who are helping you already can actually help with asking better discovery questions and collecting really meaningful inputs from the customers when they talk to them in their regular interactions. So delivery, right? It brings a lot of complexities delivering at a global scale, and these varying timelines, the content needs, different localization challenges you run into. And so there's an opportunity to make sure you have adaptable systems and processes that scale without slowing you down. Global delivery really demands adaptable systems. It was mentioned earlier, things like responsiveness. Your product needs to scale across these different languages and contents and formats and market expectations without losing that cohesion. So you really want to build systems that flex but don't break. You got to plan for localization. It's not like a checkbox, enter a new market, you know? So you've got to think about localization and adaptation from day one. You've got to budget a bit of time, make sure you have the resources, and expect challenges. Anticipating these is really key to globally rolling out great experiences. Also, your tech stack and processes can make or break global delivery. So lean into automation and integrated tools that work nicely with your designers and your developers, and empower those teams, right? That can really help to accelerate delivery, but keep quality high. Now we're talking about tracking, so monitoring, right? You've shipped it, it's out there, it's in the world. Yeah, make sure you're getting the right data though, or else it's no good. So you got to segment global users, right? Make sure you kind of set this up. Don't just generalize your user base. And if you have these clear global segments and cohorts that reflect your users, you can really understand behaviors across different regions or groups. They're actionable inputs, actionable insights. I think globally, put these in front and center in dashboards, right? So again, having a cohort somewhere that you can access in your tool, one thing, but making sure that it's kind of a part of the regular metrics that you're checking, the things that you're putting in front of your bosses, and review that performance across markets. That way you can really catch and reduce friction before it becomes a major problem. And it doesn't need to be perfect to begin with. You know, you can start with a few broad strokes, big global cohorts, and learn as you go and refine them and break them down further as you're going. So you can just start small, but think big. If you're experiencing frictions close to home within your product team before you even get to ship that global product, you're not alone. So rethink your processes to reduce that friction as you scale globally. And if you adapt your processes with consideration to that nice global audience you're after, you'll get a more seamless experience for users everywhere. So good luck.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Marcs. And that brings us to the non-presentation part of the alignment, the panelist part of the alignment, where we all get to answer questions. If you do have questions, please do jump into the Q&A box at the bottom. There's no questions being asked yet, which means that you will be at the first of the queue, the start of the queue, and we will prioritize your questions over my questions, and even the questions from the audience members who registered ahead of time. But I want to start with one of those. So one person who presumably in the room, this is asked in the registration form, was asking a question about coffee machine UX. And I'd love to answer their specific question, but also broaden it maybe to products more generally, beyond coffee machine UX. They ask, we're currently working on renewing our UX and UI for coffee machines. What should we be doing now while we're building the English version to make it more easily adaptable to other languages and markets down the line? So that's obviously about how you can build a product so that you don't have this kind of debt that you have to solve during the localization process down the line. Can anybody come in on that one? Is that a question that anyone here can answer? Marcs, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So this definitely, you've got to think about the responsiveness. I just imagine a coffee machine, it's a smaller screen, you know, maybe I'm misguided here, but it's a smaller screen. So making sure the design is responsive and can adapt to longer text strings, that's a good start. And then my mind goes to the flexibility, different drink names, right? That's probably the biggest thing. In different markets, you're going to have different names and a different drink selection. So making sure that whatever the software is in there can adapt and actually accommodate the various drinking styles. I think that's an interesting problem to solve right there.
Olga, you've got up your hand.
Yeah, it's more like I wanted to share my personal frustration with one of the coffee machine interface. So again, like think beyond languages, think beyond localization. But an example I wanted to give. So you could select in our coffee machine in the office like different volume of a liquid, be it the coffee or be it like a warm water for tea or mate that I drink a lot. And for some reason, this like adjustment is actually a slider, and it's very like it has a lot of friction when you kind of slide from left to right to change the to change how much water you get. So I always end up either having too little or too much, and it's super annoying. So think about also kind of like the speed of interaction with, if it's a touch screen, for example. I think it's also kind of goes back to like Alba talked about the speed of websites. But again, even if you're interacting directly with a device such as a coffee machine, that's also important.
Alba, you've got your hand up. Oh, I think you're on mute, Alba.
Okay. Yeah, so on the back of that site speed and that call out from Olga, some of the friction that I've experienced, particularly with coffee machines, is how long it can take for that coffee to be brewed. And to give some context, I'm originally Spanish, so in the Spanish culture, you know, coffee is there's a ritual behind coffee and making that coffee, and it's not something that you would rush and you would put it in a nice cup and you would make your milk frothy and all that. But I worked for a couple of years in London, and I recently had some friends over at my place, and we imported our coffee machine from Spain. And when they were making themselves coffee, so the coffee machine pours in first the coffee, but then it takes a little bit for the milk to become frothy and come out. And all my friends were taking out the coffee before the coffee machine had finalized making your coffee. So what I think could have been a good improvement for that machine is maybe, showing how much more still needs to happen for that coffee to be finalized, for you to take away your cup and, drink it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. I actually once had the opposite problem, which was that in a previous office, an employer, they had a coffee machine in the kind of communal area that was the best coffee I've ever had in the UK, and was a perfect interface, kind of iPad, couple of buttons. And the result was that I became more dependent on coffee than was good for me. So there are limits to how good the UX could be. Can we get the same question, but with a generic software product then? If we're just talking about more specifically, what can you do to enable your product to be localized later in the most seamless possible way, as easily as possible, that maybe is less specific to coffee machines, and is just maybe an app of any kind? Is there best practice stuff that I don't know if you know, Marcs, but that you see businesses do, where they get to the moment of globalization and they go, oh, I'm swimming in, I wish I'd done the original design process differently?
I think one of the big things, it comes from, even the software design, it's not thinking about it early enough, right? The first time I ever heard about localization was, I was a product manager, and the developer asked me, are we going to localize the app? And he had to explain it to me. But that decision at that point, saying, yes, we will eventually, takes us down a very different path that's hard to get back to if you don't think about it from the beginning. And then the internationalization process and going into the code and making all these changes is kind of the biggest barrier that we see from customers. So just thinking about it early, even if you're not starting localization right away, even if you're not ready, you can still start and make some good choices up front to anticipate that change and make it easier down the road.
Absolutely. So we have another question here. Oh, actually, I can see that somebody has gone into the box and asked a question. So I want to get to that one first. Luciano asks that we often think of American companies need to make products and user experiences more friendly, but with globalization and experiences are not only English, but some other language. Are there any comments on how non-English companies are adapting to the big influx of English speakers? For example, do you see a trend of Japanese, Russian, Chinese, etc. products making their user experience simpler to international users who do not speak their language? So is there a way that products are adapting for non-English domestic users and being more inclusive on that level? And I tempt anybody with that one. Otherwise, we'll have to write an answer slowly and circle back to it in a little bit, maybe.
I think that's a great question. I'm trying to think of a real life example. I can't think of any right now, but it goes both ways, right? So there are also a lot of companies in Latin America, Asia, that are creating products and content in their language, and they had to expand to the West. So it applies to all companies in general. I don't know if anyone has, I'm trying to think of an example.
Alba, you've got up your hand.
Yeah, I have an example. I briefly worked for a Japanese company in the automobile financing industry. And the Japanese culture is very different to the West. It is, very humble and respectful. And the chatbot that was available on that website was, like very, very high context, very nice, very, there was a lot of information given to the consumer in those interactions before the consumer was redirected to, customer support. When we started looking at the experience in Europe, we quickly realized that consumers were opening the chatbot, but they weren't really, continuing the conversation. They were getting really frustrated. So we started testing just having shorter, more transactional interactions, because the European consumer really wanted to get to the point, to solve their issue as soon as possible, whereas the Japanese consumer, kind of appreciated more having that fictitious conversation with the chatbot and feeling, taken care of.
Artem, I can see you've got your hand up as well.
Thank you. Yes, as a testing provider, we do work with companies across the globe, and including the ones that are located in non-English speaking territories and expanding into English speaking territories. The challenges are quite similar. They're just basically mirrored. Same problems of the language, the culture, and local environments and third parties still applies. However, the scale of those is less, so it's globally English-speaking cultures are much better understood because of the, I suppose, the popular culture in movies and music and all that stuff, informing the world pretty well of what the expectations and culture and language is like in the English-speaking part of the world.
Final answer to wrap up on this question then, Olga, over to you.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of one example, which you probably know, maybe not. It's called Telegram, which is a messenger/social network. And I think they kind of started with an ambition of being global or launching for the global markets. Yet still, right, even though they have like a big user base of users from all possible countries in the world right now. So for example, they even managed to grab a share of Korean users, where the local Korean messenger got like surveyed by government maybe too much, and people like, well, maybe we have an alternative. Let's try the Telegram. I think still there are some challenges, again, like based on personal experience. It's not really intuitive to me how would you, for example, react to the message in the channel. It's like, it's a little bit tricky, or how you reply. Because I am used to more like I don't know, like Facebook messengers and like WhatsApp style, and suddenly Telegram does something slightly different. So there is still a friction, but I think they try to kind of maybe mimic American companies as well in some way, and anticipate like, okay, well, if we do the most of the things as they do, then probably it will be easier to go like and localize for some specific user experiences.
We actually did have an example speak on the alignment. I believe Glovo, which is, if you don't know it, a kind of European DoorDash Deliveroo type business. We had the UX writer at Glovo, and she was talking about how in tourist areas they had basically a big button that said "turn on machine translation in English," more or less. And that they had a very sort of strong access-based argument. People knew what they were getting with the translation. They knew it was a machine. They knew that it wasn't going to be perfect, and it's kind of low enough stakes. So that was one way that they interacted with it. I'd love to move on to KPIs and ways of measuring this. So I don't know if anybody on the panel has experience thinking about ways that they could measure friction or understand kind of systems of information that they can understand where they need to look to in their product or around the world in order to examine the friction more closely. Is that perhaps from one of our practitioners? Do any of you have systems in place or metrics that you pay close attention to in order to keep tabs on your local friction? Artem.
I didn't need to raise a hand. Yes, a couple of examples come to mind. One is a pretty universal tool, which is a funnel. You can visualize a lot of processes and user experiences as a funnel with clearly defined stages of the process. And then there's lots of tools that will help you measure the fall off between the stages of the funnel and the conversion rates to the next stage. very helpful tool in many different situations, including measuring the friction, especially when you compare your funnel performance in different territories. Another tool that comes to mind is a retention curve. A retention curve, it's hard to explain without showing it, so please Google it. It's basically a nice way to visualize how sticky your product is and how much repeat usage it creates. This is a great way to see if your retention curve is strong. That means that you don't have a lot of friction, but if you see a significant drop-off, it might hint where that drop-off is and where to focus your efforts.
I can see that everybody's hand has gone up at once in the meantime. So perhaps Alba, if you want to answer first.
Yeah, so obviously we will have, those quantitative measures to understand, where a consumer is dropping off through the funnel. But I think that some of the things, talked about today are really hard to measure and identify. And for that, I think it's really valuable to speak with consumers directly. So if you have the opportunity to, have a focus group from different locations, and before launching anything, that has a really big different experience locally, just check in with them and try to get that local perspective on how they are interpreting it, because often, in a product team, you've worked on something for so long that you just get narrowed down onto it, and you get like very attached, and it seems very straightforward, but everyone has their own interpretation of tags, copy, symbols, etc. So yeah.
Olga, do you want to answer next?
Yeah, I just was thinking of this the tool that we started implementing. It's called Sprig, and in a nutshell, it's kind of like you can launch in-product surveys, and those are pretty adaptable. Specifically, you can target as a specific population. Let's say you want to kind of ask a localized cohort and say, okay, everyone that comes from this market or launches my product in this language, I want to ask them these questions. And then another one, another great feature that I like about the Sprig is actually the survey itself is pretty customizable. You can do like a Likert scale of different dimensions. You can say, well, smiley scale, or you can ask directly the question, well, did you find this helpful, or did you understand what it does, that specific feature? So that's just like one tool that I was thinking about, how to kind of identify friction. Again, it's like asking directly, but in product.
And final answer, Caronlina.
Yeah, so I think for companies, global companies like Uber, measuring quantifying friction can be quite complex process. We do have user research, the regional teams in touch with users to get that direct contact. But we also do a lot of testing. And Artem mentioned about testing the production, and I cannot agree more with that. It's really important to test the production app to get a sense of what the user is experiencing. So we have what we call sanity LQA, which is a continuous testing the production in different markets. And we measure not only functional bugs, but also linguistic and user experience. So I do think it's important to quantify and have metrics in place. Even if it's not perfect, at least you can get a sense of what are the gaps and where you should invest more. Because it's such a complex topic, as we have seen, at least you get a sense, okay, this is where we need to focus more our attention.
Just before we jump to the next question, I've got to take the opportunity now, because I know we're so close to the end, to plug the next episode of The Alignment. That will take place on the 30th of October, so a month and 5 days from now. For the first time ever, and this is very exciting for me specifically, I'm not going to be hosting. My colleague's going to be hosting. I instead am going to be on annual leave in Taiwan. But so please do come just to see the other host. It's going to be all about help. My local product is broken. So we're going to be doing a deeper dive on local issues functional issues, UX issues, and some of the specific things that you should solve and look into solving if you have a global product or a localized product. It's going to be really exciting. Speakers are yet to be announced, but please do come along. And I think that my colleague has posted it in the chat right now. Final couple of questions then. So I'd love to ask about trade-offs. I know sometimes product managers agonize over in pursuit of lower and lower friction products. They agonize over the number of steps in their sign-up process or the complexity of a flow. And in so doing, they often have to make trade-offs and reduce levels of data capture that they would like or other things that they would like in the product. I wonder if anybody on the panel has a story or an anecdote about a trade-off they've had to make in order to deliver a simpler, less friction-heavy product. Is there anybody who could come forward with an anecdote like that for us? Marcs.
Yeah, I think one big trade-off that's always made is velocity, right? And there's a little bit of a delay. It can take some time, and if you haven't timed it properly, you might have to wait in order to get this experience, maybe get all the translations in place or get in-market testing on that validation. And so sometimes with continuous delivery teams, they'll navigate that trade-off and understand, like, is it better to hold off on this or get this feature into production, and maybe somebody will see it in the wrong language, and that's not great. In my line of work, it's embarrassing. But actually, sometimes we'll talk to customers and they'll say, I don't really care. We have very multilingual customers, and they'll say, like, if it's important or it's going to add value to my work, just like give it to me, please, and worry about that for your future customers, right? So navigating those trade-offs and really, I think, connecting with your users to understand what matters to them, what kind of trade-offs would they like you to be making, can be really insightful.
Olga, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think one of my recent trade-offs is actually kind of like feature adoption. So we were building a new feature and we wanted, of course, to kind of launch it into general availability and make it available to everyone in the world who would be using our product. And we realized that, well, maybe we should start smaller and we should kind of select the early adopter program from a specific markets in this case actually, and work with them first and get their feedback first before we kind of make it universally accessible for everyone. Again, it's kind of like related to how fast you go to market, but also how big you go to market. It's more like speed of insights was prioritized over feature adoption in this case.
Caronlina, I think we've got time for one more answer, and it's yours.
Yeah, very quick. I think for global companies, everything is a trade-off, right? You cannot have the perfect experience. You have sometimes to meet very different demands from users in Latin America and Asia. So it's always a trade-off. That's how I see it. And you try your best to maintain the brand and offer the best user experience, but always having to make that trade-off.
Fantastic. Well, here in the UK, it is now 6 p.m. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks particularly to our fantastic guests for preparing what you had to say. It was super interesting. You'll be able to catch all of that and more on our social feed and on our YouTube. But please do come back next month for the next episode of The Alignment. I hope to see everybody there. Thank you, everybody, and good night.